We are going rapid fire. It's myself and Sean's first 20-second clock over at Underdog Fantasy. We are drafting here. I believe, Sean, you've set us up in the puppy, and we're drafting from the 9 spot, so it's going to be moving pretty fast with that 20-second clock. But I am excited. Christian McCaffrey on 101, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill. I'm on Ross St. Brown. We have a couple of picks to go, but do you think we'll be up to speed here, Sean, being able to do the 20-second clock while drafting for a podcast?
Yeah, you gotta be ready though. You gotta get after it. This one is fun. It is 20 seconds. It is the $5 puppy. There is a $200,000 grand prize, which we will win today. Colm, this is going to be an extension of the previous show where we talked about the 0 RB prep kit and how you use that to dominate in that 0 RB area. This is going to be extreme 0 RB draft. Puka or Garrett Wilson for you here?
Let's go Garrett Wilson.
So we get our guy who is going to be the 2024 CeeDee Lamb. Colm, I know that with your boy, multiple MVP, most of which were not justified. But when we have a guy who's won so many MVPs and may now be throwing to his best wide receiver, we probably could get Devontae Adams on to explain why that's not correct. But Garrett Wilson, we're going to be looking at him like CeeDee Lamb, where drafted at the 1-2 turn this year, next year in competition for the 101.
I think we could possibly see that. The one thing that could, there's potential that this could be the last season for Rodgers. We are on the clock though. Before we get into that, I would go Chris Olave. Have you a different pick you want to go with?
Well, let's go ahead and take Nico Collins, just because if we end up getting a lot of receivers here as we plan, if we can get 6 receivers in the first 7 rounds, I think we want to be pretty careful about not having them all with the same bye, that week 12 bye. That's one of the things that I think is a little bit tricky about taking Garrett Wilson there, because Chris Olave is definitely interesting. One of the best picks in round 4 when you have this specific draft slot is T. Higgins. He's got the week 12 bye also. So you have to be at least a little bit cognizant of that. I do think that Chris Olave in a vacuum is the right pick. That's who I would have wanted with Puka Nacua.
To expand on that a bit further, you obviously were kicking off. That would have been 2 week 12 buys back to back at the start. I've run into a few drafts with week 12 and week 14 that can be pretty challenging. You mentioned that when you were drafting with Ben last week and you were talking about the buys, when you fill out the wide receiver room, if it's more than 6 wide receivers, are you still keeping it very tight? I've been keeping it very tight on the buys and trying to separate them out, and I kind of felt like maybe I was overemphasizing that. But is that something that you're looking to do and keep that wide receiver room tight? Or is that something that even if you have 7 wide receivers, you're still looking to try and balance it as much as possible this early?
Yeah, I think early on, you want to keep as many pathways open as you can. So you use it as a tiebreaker, and then that tiebreaker allows you more flexibility as the draft progresses. If you don't have the 2 guys in the same vicinity, then you're going to take the best player, and then you have less flexibility, but you can still intentionally make the correct buy picks later on. It's going to be something that's small, but we want to stack up as many small edges as we can. We don't want to miss the playoffs by 5 points because we made decisions that knocked down our scoring in a key week. You put one of those really low scores up in a heavy bye week, and it can cause you some problems when you're talking about that initial advance. In order to win the $200,000, we have to get to the playoffs in the first place. Colm, you look at all these guys here by ADP, and almost all of them are week 14 bye. Again, that kind of emphasizes how that is an issue.
They also are Texans players who I don't know if you're setting this up to go towards the Texans, but that is also a potential angle here. Outside of the Texans, with Sean, there's somebody here with a week 5 bye that we're probably interested in.
Yeah, so the issue that you run into there, as well as you kind of mentioned, is that CJ Stroud, who, if you're going to take 2 Houston Texans receivers early, you're going to want Stroud. He's a pretty awkward pick from the back. Colm, Dell, Flowers, I think that this is a situation where to get both Houston and Baltimore, it's okay to take that second 14.
Okay. Crush my dreams, Sean. Sam Laporta is the player that I mentioned. Maybe Sean has hopes that he's going to make it 6 picks around. That would be pretty nice. But it also one of the players that you get opened up to potentially in these builds does become Trey McBride. But we'll see how bye weeks are going to affect us when we get to that point. How are you feeling then? So that decision for me, I haven't done a lot of Houston stacks, and mainly because of the cost of trying to put those together and then get the quarterback as well and pair that into it. Are you looking at it in a similar way when you go Zay Flowers there over Nico Collins? Well, Trey McBride, Shawn, first tight end off the board.
Yeah, and I think you can understand why.
One pick, Shawn, to get Sam Laporta. Can it happen? How have you pulled that? How have you pulled that off?
Laporta does come back. I think it's one of the things. Laporta is a guy where, because the 5-6 turn, when you have a later slot, gives you a shot at both Kyle Pitts and George Kittle. And Colm, I would argue that George Kittle is, one of the maybe 3 most undervalued players in all of fantasy. As much as I like Laporta, with his ceiling potentially being limited by all of the other pieces in that offense, I do have a preference of hitting those guys at the 5-6. But the other part that you can do, and something I've seen happen a lot recently, so I don't know if we have kind of a dynamic out there with Laporta right now where people are really pushing back on what his ceiling is, but he has fallen into this range a bunch. And that's where I like him, especially if you took Garrett Wilson in the first round, because the other pick there would have been T. Higgins. And I think if you have 4 receivers and just 2 buys covered in the first 4 picks, then you're starting to run into a little bit more trouble if you're hoping to do the 6 receiver build with the possibility of the wide receiver 7, but not the necessity. That's the part that I think it's a little bit tricky. You're almost pushed into that 7th receiver if you don't build in this way. So I'm very happy about the way those first 4 picks have gone.
Yeah, I'm really happy. And I did think when we took Zay Flowers there over Laporta, I wasn't expecting him to come back, but there is obviously a number of fallback options if McBride hadn't went, but quite a rich area here for those elite tight ends with Mark Andrews. Shawn, you mentioned Kittle. Somebody who, if it does come around to it and he's an option, would be, I think, a perfect second tight end to add to this roster. And I think there's just a massive amount. I think he's severely underdrafted at his current ADP. So I think he should be much closer to that Mark Andrews level than he currently is. Andrews going to pick 48 in this particular draft. Dalton Kincaid, mid-5th round, has gone off the board as well. We'll see, Shawn, who becomes available when it comes back around to us. Keenan Allen and Jaden Reed were both players that, I had some optimism would get to us. They both go here in the 5th so far. We're 2 picks away. Terry McLaurin goes off the board. A number of interesting names here, Shawn, but Xavier Worthy is here. Would be my call. Odunze is in this range. You've Rashee Rice in the queue as well. Chris Godwin. We'll see what happens in 1 pick, but if he does last, is Worthy the clear pick for you? And we did touch on it a little bit on the show earlier this week with the Jordan Addison and Rashee Rice situations. Are they how close now is Worthy and Rice for you in terms of drafting them? Are you starting to draft some more Rashee Rice? I know Worthy is one of your favorite wide receiver targets in this range.
Yeah, I'm very willing to take Rice. I think that one of the things you like about having that 9th slot is that you do get a shot at the Chiefs receivers, and that part of it is fantastic. My comment, Eric Hove and I, who, big part of our OT community, somebody who won the draft contest a couple years ago, somebody I still draft teams with, obviously, we took Rashee Rice over Worthy. Colm,
down Dick Kittle here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I don't necessarily want to get both of the Chiefs receivers, and it's just a tad bit early for me to take Rome Odunze. We now have both Sam Laporta and George Kittle to go with those 4 early receivers. We can hope, I think, that now with the situation with Jordan Addison, that he might come back to us in round 7. There's always a chance you would get JSN as a faller also, even though in most of my drafts, I see him go ahead of ADP. So I have a hard time sometimes squaring those, because if he's going to stay at 77, which is where he currently is, then sometimes he has to go after 77. I usually see him in the 72, 73 range. But if you went after 77, 81 would help balance out some of those other picks. That is our next selection there. Colm, Deontay Johnson, I think someone else who would have been interesting in that last pick.
He very much would be, and he's becoming more and more of a priority for me in that area. If he's, if, for example, George Kittle went, I think he's my next play there. Odunze is interesting, and Addison does go at pick 73, so not much of a change there, and he does not make it back around to us. But Johnson should have a lot of work. If that offense is going to turn around, I think it's going to be heavily on Deontay Johnson's back. That is how they turn it around. Obviously, they're going to look to run the ball quite a considerable amount with how they've invested in that position. But yeah, I think he's the clear wide receiver one there. And I think in the 6th round is a great draft pick. JSN Shawn also did go. Robodunze went to that same drafter. So we have had a sweep here over the last little bit since our last pick. We may, at the end of the draft, look back and live to regret maybe making that decision. But I do love the flexibility that Laporta and Kittle will give us now for the remainder of the draft as to how we can use maybe an additional spot at the running back position as we look to go forward. We are one pick away, Shawn. We are into a running back zone, but we do want to. How much do you want to push this 0 RB conversation? I'm good to go with Jameson Williams if that's the way you want to play it here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and make that pick. We already have 2 tight ends from the 2 teams on that week 17 tilt. It's a situation as well where it makes Jared Goff very viable, and Goff one of those QBs that allows you to do a lot of things. You can get that week 17 game stack when you have it set up there with Kittle. One of the reasons why I think Kittle, again, is so valuable, because it helps you execute the Lions thesis, which when Goff is one of the cheapest, potentially high-scoring quarterbacks, and he doesn't have that overlap with the other things you're trying to do, that part, when you're looking to maximize the number of guys you get before you take a quarterback, can be very helpful. Colm, we did lose a couple of our 0 RB targets, though, as we went through there. Aaron Jones, James Conner, Ramondre Stevenson all come off. Love all of those guys. This to me
I
is
go
Jonathan
Warren
Brooks.
here.
You have a okay.
I'll let you go Brooks if you want. I just tend to prefer Warren, and I guess I would defer to you on that based on you have a lot more college insights than I would have. If you're drafting solo there, my patented question is: Jonathan Brooks the pick for you over Jalen Warren, or have you them pretty much in the in the same tier?
I'm going to go with Jonathan Brooks if I'm drafting solo, in part because you're going to have more volume in all likelihood once he's completely healthy. I don't think that he's going to be in a committee like we have for Jalen Warren. So we did a big piece on Warren in the previous show. We talked through all of our 0 RB criteria. And one of the things with Warren is that you have that committee to start with, but then if the starter gets injured, if the running mate gets injured, you probably have the whole thing to yourself. And so that part for him is fantastic. For Brooks, you're going into a situation where his head coach had Rachaad White, who was a far inferior version of Brooks, and made him pretty dynamic, in part because Rachaad White led the NFL in running back routes last season. That part, I think, gives Brooks a really interesting floor to go with, a dynamic upside if he actually is healthy and is able to show off the explosiveness that he had last season. Then you have this big volume component. You have potentially an efficiency component. You have a high-value touch component. They've added a lot at the receiving positions that makes them more exciting as an overall offense. So if you get that step forward from Bryce Young, then you have a different context that I don't think is very heavily priced in. If people thought that the Panthers were going to be good this season, and by good, I just mean not awful, then Brooks would be more expensive, right? I think that we want to at least consider that potential upside as we look at what to do with him to start off a team. And certainly if he's your first running back and you would get him as a league winner, then you're all set from a structural perspective.
That's fair. And I did mention if the offense was to turn around that it would be true Deontay Johnson. I think it has to be true, as I mentioned a little bit, the running game. And it'll be interesting. I'm just not sure that they're going to go straight towards the rookie to start off. But I think that in terms of the overall talent of those guys, he leads the way there. We are one pick away, Shawn. We have had quite a heavy running back round here, but Tyjae Spears would be the next running back by ADP. I noticed you've put Javonte Williams and Chase Brown in the queue, but haven't started our buddy Devin Singletary, who has now been added. I nudged you on the last one. I'll let you make the decision here.
We'll go ahead and grab Spears.
Going to pull a question on Spears, Shawn, that I've been asked to come in as a YouTube comment, was that people were surprised that you mentioned that, the split between Spears and Pollard. And I think it was more of a just discussion point as to what could happen, but people thought that maybe you had those guys closer than people had expected.
In terms of actually having Pollard in the mix as well?
Yeah. I think the comment was around the range of that he may be the backup.
Yeah, let's go ahead and make this next pick, and then we can dive into that again through this sort of lens of the 0 RB criteria. Colm, because we're going to either have Devin Singletary or Javonte Williams here, I think we probably want to pass on Purdy and obviously pass on Jared Goff. Goff's ADP is about where our next pick is.
Yeah.
It's possible we could lose them both. And given that the other, like 3 of the other 4 quarterbacks are gone, that could come back to haunt us. But I think we want to be gutsy. Do you prefer Singletary or Williams?
Let's go with Singletary. That was a great filibuster, Shawn. We're down to 2 seconds there.
So we do get Singletary. We don't have to worry about which Denver Broncos running back will end up being the league winner there. Colm, we have a couple of things that we can discuss on this one, which is Pollard versus Spears. They're going fairly close together at this point. With Pollard, in terms of being special, we have those plus peripherals before 2023. With Spears, we have them from last year. So I think that is a big deal, leaning in favor of the younger guy. The problem that we run into is that this is a poor offense, and it's a pure committee to start with here. The thing that gives them some upside is that both of them have the pass catching ability. Both of them obviously have standalone value since we think they're going to be co-starters. And then in addition to that, if one of them goes down, it's not, again, this is the thing we discussed last week. It's not that the person becomes the every down player and owns every single snap. That's not the way offenses work, except in 2 or 3 cases every year. Not the way they work in 2024. But the person who's left is going to get a big workload, is going to be a league winner. We know that Spears has some, very mild, I think, but real medical red flags in his background. Maybe that pushes you a little bit in the direction of Tony Pollard. I think that Spears is the guy who's better positioned to overcome being in what we think is going to be a bad offense, since he more or less already did it last year, whereas Tony Pollard flopped in an elite offense.
What pick is the Amon-Ra St. Brown drafter, Shawn, at? We've had a quarterback run here that I'm waiting to see if Jared Goff will make it back to us.
So the Amon-Ra drafter has passed. They already have Lamar Jackson and Jordan Love. That part gives us...
deep breath.
Yeah. It makes us worry a little bit less about
he's gone.
But he does go, and that is going to be
a dagger
to a drafter with no Detroit Lions component. That does happen, and that is legal for them to do. So we can't overly fixate on that column. As we come back over here, Oh, Jerry Jeudy goes one spot ahead of us too. That's unfortunate because it would have also opened up.
We probably continue the running backs here. We've Charbonnet, Miller, Lloyd as options. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, so let's go ahead and grab a Zach Charbonnet. I think when we have a Jaylen Warren to start us out, we don't need that early season production from the Ford slot. And Charbonnet was the perfect example of someone who, once you've worked through the 0 RB criteria and worked through those scenarios, he becomes a lot more exciting than he was before you did the exercise. Anybody who's interested in that, make sure you check out the previous episode. Colm, I think we jumped right back in with Kendre Miller with this next pick. Do you see someone else?
No, I'm happy with that. I was hoping to get 2 out of him and Lloyd along with Charbonnet. And the thing that'll be interesting to see now at the end of this draft, Shawn, is obviously we didn't get Goff, who we wanted, or Purdy, who was the other option. Quite a heavy running back run where we've seen Purdy, Prescott, Williams, Tua, and then Goff go in the space of 8 to 10 picks. Trevor Lawrence has since gone off the board. When we made that decision to take Devin Singletary, Purdy, Prescott, Williams, Tua, and Goff were all on the board. Some of those teams now are into their third quarterback. And the one that I was most nervous about was obviously the Amon-Ra St. Brown drafter, but it does go to the Jamar Chase drafter in this particular instance. But the interesting part's going to be we have now went Warren, Spears, Singletary, Charbonnet, and Miller as 5 running backs in a row at that point. And I have to say I'm incredibly pleased with that group of running backs. Whereas if we, at the end, depending on what happens here with quarterback, the way it could have played out with not having either Charbonnet or Miller, and I'm sure if both Purdy and Goff had come back, they may have both been in conversation for those 2 picks. So if we can pair these late round quarterbacks together and make it a little bit interesting, I think that this team's set up incredibly well. It would have been ideal to have a Jared Goff on this roster, though. So we'll see what we can do. I think it immediately probably becomes an Aaron Rodgers targeted draft, with even though you joked about it at the start. Is there any other quarterbacks, and that's mentioning, is there any other quarterbacks outside of Bo Nix and Daniel Jones that we're looking at here, or are they the clear potential selections? Not at this exact pick, but at the quarterback position.
Well, I don't think yet. We have to see how it builds. So one of the things we have to look at is whether we want to take Rodgers before or after the turn. We have a Jalen Hurts team, we have a Trevor Lawrence team, and we have a Stroud Murray team. I think it's probably just the Lawrence team that we have to worry about there. I think we can probably push this and take Jaleel McLaughlin and then be done at the running back position. And this, again, Colm, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to do the extreme 0 RB. It's not, super extreme, obviously, but in round 8 here, and then we take the 6 in a row, and the 6 names you get are just way too good to really be available there.
And something that we talked about, there's no crossover in bye weeks with those 6 guys, which is obviously appealing as well.
Very appealing. So we have that set. We're a couple of picks away from Aaron Rodgers. The team we were, not really worried about, but looking at there did take Kirk Cousins, who is the ADP value, as opposed to giving us any trouble with our guy. The unfortunate part is Wandale does go. He is somebody I think that we needed to potentially prioritize with the previous pick. The thing that is somewhat interesting there, the 2 teams that I was not worried about did take quarterbacks. We got Matthew Stafford as the 3rd QB for a team that is Stroud Murray. We got Baker Mayfield as the 2nd quarterback to go with a Jalen Hurts. That team has Chris Godwin, so that part, probably not.
I assume at this point that we're the last team to draft a quarterback, and I would have to assume that we're into close to the 30s at the QB 30 at this point. So the other teams have, multiple teams here with at least 3 quarterbacks in this draft.
Yeah, I've been in these fast puppies. I think have drawn an interesting group of drafters who have been more willing to do that. We do now have the Josh Allen drafter taking Will Levis, so I believe everyone has 2. other than us. Colm, the very obvious thing that always comes up in this type of situation is the Denver Broncos element, where we have McLaughlin. We didn't get a Bengals player on this team, but you have the Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims potential outs, and then to Nick's late, you've got the 2 early tight ends, so you can stick at 2 tight end. We are definitely done at the running back position. We have 5 receivers. Troy Franklin does go there at 173, 4 picks before we are up. The top wide receiver right now by ADP, Roman Wilson, Demarcus Robinson, Malachi Corley, who would go with our QB, but probably isn't a target, and then Marvin Mims. So Mims will probably make it to us.
I think he should, because the 2 drafters in front of us as well have both 7 wide receivers. So I would imagine they'll go a different direction here, but who knows, Shawn? No, the drafter gets up to 8 in the pick before us, but does go with Demarcus Robinson. I'm happy here to go with Mims.
And I had misspoken. The Jaden Daniels drafter didn't have a second QB yet. They get Geno Smith to go with maybe nobody, but Noah Fant. You know, we've loved
cheapest stack, the cheapest stack you can get for the Seahawks.
I mean, is Noah Fant with Geno Smith worse than Marvin Mims and Bo Nix? That is the question. Certainly will be on everyone's lips as they look at our draft here. Colm, it's kind of gross.
It's a lot of running backs that are available here, and Luke McCaffrey or Devontae Walker. Do you have one of those wide receivers you want to get on the roster?
No. Yeah. Well, Luke McCaffrey is a no. Devontae Walker is the player that we selected. You don't necessarily have to grab him that early, but he gives us the second Baltimore receiver off of Nico Collins there. Also gives us our 4th week 14 bye. So, Colin, we did not successfully execute that element after we talked about it early in the show.
I was going to ask you there, we obviously take Walker ahead of ADP at that point, but is there part of it that, with the limited amount of quarterback targets that we're looking at the rest of the way, you'd want to reach and get Nix there rather than reach and get Walker? Yeah.
Yes. There is. So Nix would have been 20
seconds gets us.
Right. So we make a little bit of a blunder there. We'll see if it does cost us. Who do you like if we end up needing to make a QB and sort of an emergency pick at the end? We have Bryce Young, Drake May, Daniel Jones, Derek Carr, Bo Nix. All of those guys are available, as is Jay McCarthy. Colm, this also feels a bit like a round 18 Justin Fields selection if we don't like anything else.
We can do that, but I think that we need to have a second quarterback to do the Justin Fields pick, most likely. And I think that's what you're inferring as well. Ideally here we get Bo Nix to go with the team. If we don't, then I think we pivot towards Daniel Jones. When you're going into this range and you're looking at the potential quarterbacks, I think he's the one outside of Justin Fields, obviously, if he's starting, that has that potential rushing profile to add a little bit to it if they were going unstacked. But you could, obviously, we actually thinking about it as well. We do have Devin Singletary on the roster, which would fit with that for Daniel Jones. So Jones would be my preference if Bo Nix does go. We did land into a range there, Shawn, though, when we looked at the ADP and the players. Like, there's a lot of, for talking about zero RB, Bucky Irving did go 1 pick ahead of us, not last round, but Khalil Herbert's there. We talked a little bit about Damian Pierce, but we do have Will Shipley in this area too. So there's more running backs, but we actually had filled out our running back position more than maybe we had expected. And that's kind of the pivot point, I guess, looking back now in hindsight, will be our pick of Singletary and Charbonnet, where we did that. So it's like we took Singletary over Jared Goff or Brock Purdy, and then now we've taken Bo Nix at this particular spot where you could have potentially, at that last pick could have gone the way of a Will Shipley or a Khalil Herbert in that instance. So that'll be something to look at. Daniel Jones does go off the board a couple of picks later. So we are in a situation now where we have 2 quarterbacks. We are set kind of at running back. We're 2 picks away from our next selection. Shawn, is there anyone that you're trying to add in these late drafts, as much as possible to those rosters? And I feel like we've talked about it a lot, but the upside smash of a last round Justin Fields with this roster is something that could be massive. So I would probably lean toward that 3rd quarterback.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take Justin Fields there. I'm trying to not take him very often because it does seem like the chances of him simply winning the job are very minimal at this point.
Yeah.
And yet, the reason that I take him in round 18 when we don't have anything else built that will work is that I think that he is the QB that easily crushes anybody drafted after Trevor Lawrence. So we look here at the board, we see him go at the 11-11. Every other pick from that point on would be crushed by a Fields if Fields plays. And I just don't think that Fields' production is very strongly dependent on or even that correlated with the receiving weapons there. You can play him, you can get the scoring that you need and have that work as an uncorrelated type of play. So when we have Aaron Rodgers, we have Bo Nix. Those are guys who can get us there, especially with the roster that we have, because the flip side of ending up with those 2 QBs is that we have firepower at receiver, running back, and tight end that you simply shouldn't be able to get in drafts. Now, the consequence and the trade-off was that we have a QB position that probably doesn't play in the fantasy playoffs. That is a long way away. And if Justin Fields ends up being the guy, I like the way this team works. The other thing that we could have done at the very end there to get a game stack with Bo Nix would have been to take Andre Yoshivas. Pete and I did that on the Best Ball Banana Stand, not this week, but last week. Check out that show if you're looking for the explanation for why he could be the guy and not Jermaine Burton to drive that Bengals offense as the 3rd or possibly even the 2nd receiver. If you have anything happen to one of the top 2 guys, unfortunately, T. Higgins has had some health issues over the past couple of seasons. Colm, we accomplished our objective, which was to go 0 RB to land as many early receivers as possible. We got up to 5 because Laporta ended up being such a great value and Kittle was a good fit at the time. Do you have any regrets about taking Kittle as opposed to taking Deontay Johnson, JSN, maybe even Rome Odunze there, and what that would have allowed us to do as we came back through?
I don't. The way I would look at this is I think through those opening 7 rounds, it's kind of pretty much close to exactly what I would be looking to do. We have 5 wide receivers through 7. We have 2 tight ends. Not necessarily that it has to be 2 tight ends, but we need to have 5 wide receivers through those 7 rounds. The running backs that we ended up getting are all pretty much prime targets. Whereas the part that I was looking through the draft board at, Shawn, is the Devin Singletary pick at 112. That was the range there where we missed out on the Purdy and Goff options. I think if Goff had a minute back and we get Goff over Charbonnet, and then that would obviously shuffle with what we had to do later. There's a couple of plays that we could have, for example, if this was a Goff went, but Goff instead of Singletary, let's say at that point, and then you're swapping out, it's Aaron Rodgers for Jalen Wright then at that particular point. I would rather have a Goff Wright team, I think, than a Rodgers Singletary team would probably be the pivot point there. I think if we got Jared Goff those extra 4 picks, which once it got past the draft of taking Amon-Ra St. Brown, I thought he would get to that point. So if you're swapping out then Goff for Charbonnet, you obviously get a little bit more flexibility with what we're doing at the Rodgers or even the Bo Nix picks potentially. And I think that we could have built out a roster that I would be a little bit closer to a 10 out of 10 for me. I think this is extremely strong. that would be the one point I would have, if we had Goff on this roster, I think it would have nudged it in a different direction. The other point would be when we did get to that point where we took Walker, we could have took Nix. It worked out for us in the end up. We basically flipped their rounds. But when you're looking at ADP there's a lot of guys at the running back position that I could click quite comfortably at that point. So if we had have went in a slightly different direction with some of those running backs, I think it could have still worked out. But that's, hindsight with how the draft played out. We could do this draft and do the same decisions, and those running backs could not get to us either in those late rounds. So I think overall it's worked out really well. And I really like, you asked just about the Kittle question. I mentioned it when we had taken those two guys. That just gives you immense flexibility. You can take a tight end later if you want to, but you can also add that third quarterback if needs be. And we were able to have the 6 running backs and then still add that quarterback and be comfortable with it. So basically, that decision, I think, freed us up to take the Fields pick. I think if we were looking there for a tight end, obviously we're skipping over the Justin Fields selection. So overall, I'm very, very happy with how the draft played out. Just wish we had Jared Goff on the roster.
Yeah, and you look at that, some listeners are going to want us to push for taking one of the two guys when we already have the 3 players that is built around. For me, I have enough Lions, 49ers that it's important to be gutsy and try and build super teams and not constantly reaching for Purdy and Goff, because that'll destroy my overall ability to get value if I'm reaching for them every time. Whereas,
do you find, I find at the moment when I'm drafting, like I'm trying to get quarterbacks at like at least half a round after ADP. It's very rare that I'm taking them at their ADP. Is that the way you're looking to play it? Is like, if you can get them to come around, and the way I think we played it out there was quite logical, that there was a chance that he would get back to us, but obviously from draft to draft it doesn't always work out. But I'm trying to get all the quarterback picks that I'm making at a value, and that leads to then not getting a lot of those elite guys because they tend to go right at ADP or before.
Yeah, the elite quarterbacks don't work for what we want to accomplish in 2024. That doesn't mean that they won't end up being the tournament winners. There are some situations, like if you have one of the Dolphins running backs and you have Waddle or Tyreek Hill, where I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive to make sure I get Tua onto that team because it's built so perfectly for that play. But generally speaking, exactly what you're talking about with the quarterbacks is the case. Every once in a while, there's a Chicago Bears build where I'm going to emphasize Caleb Williams a little bit more. But you look here, Goff should have made it through. Again, sometimes that is going to happen. I would encourage people where if you don't have a Lions or 49ers player on your roster, that as the one-off, you would take Trevor Lawrence instead. Now, this may be a drafter who doesn't have a lot of Jared Goff and is trying to get some exposure that way. But taking a Trevor Lawrence or waiting to the next round where that drafter could have taken Justin Herbert instead of Dalton Schultz, I think that would have been the way to go about it. So in most cases, Jared Goff is going to make it to our spot. The other thing I think that we need to consider is that if we have a team that is so reliant on that 49ers Lions game working, in part because we've taken both Collins and Flowers and we know we're not going to get their quarterbacks, we've taken Xavier Worthy, we know we're not going to get him, then that Devin Singletary pick is a place that you can take Adonai Mitchell, and then you can take Wandale and get the Daniel Jones pick late. Taking Mitchell is the one.
The back stacks that we tend to be setting up are the Giants or the Broncos. Have you a preference at this point as to which of those to set up when you're drafting?
I think there's a little bit of a lean toward Knicks, but one of the things I'm trying to make sure that I do is to try and minimize the total number of drafts in which that's necessary. So, and then especially I think when you have an Aaron Rodgers, you'd like to get Aaron Rodgers as the sort of elite QB2, even though not really elite, doesn't fall into that QB window. But if you can take a QB window guy and Rodgers, then you're set with just the two.
Yeah.
If you end up having Rodgers and then you're looking at the late stacking types of setups, the thing that's so great about both of them is that the Broncos should be dynamic, and you have both Mims and Franklin to where there's less pressure on you there. You can get Nicks with Daniel Jones, obviously, again, very inexpensive, and you have Wan'Dale Robinson as probably one of the priority wide receiver targets, one of the only guys at receiver between rounds really 12 and 18 that you can feel comfortable with or feel good about. I don't know, comfortable. The Giants offense is going to be weird enough that maybe comfortable isn't the right word, but the player who has the talent profile and the potential volume profile to crush ADP without needing a very narrow path to play out. All of these guys who are being drafted do have a path, but for basically everyone else, it's much, much narrower than it is for Wan'Dale. And so if you can get that set up by already having Mitchell, who, I mean, he's overvalued in the grand scheme of things, and yet the way they've been talking about him there in Indianapolis and the fit that he has, I mean, he's the best fit with the Colts in their QB. The spike week upside for him, I think, makes him someone you've got to keep an eye on. Singletary we like. He fit, what was our objective in that range, which is to add a running back. Certainly when you're able to get Charbonnet, Miller, and McLaughlin, it reminds you that you didn't need a running back there. I mean, that's the thing that you want to keep in mind, is that once you have Warren and Spears, you don't need the running back in 10 because 11, 12, and 13 are going to be so favorable. That, I think, is the big takeaway from this draft, which is that your first two running backs are going to tell you a lot about what you need to do in rounds 10 and 11.
I think that's very fair. And then I mentioned as well about some of the running back names available later as well. So I think that would have been a good way to play it, but obviously that's also with hindsight. But that is going to do it for this edition of RotoViz Overtime. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening into this draft. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. You can check all of his work up on rotoviz.com. If you're signing up at rotoviz.com, you can use the code RBRadio2024 at checkout to get yourself a 10% discount off a 1-year NFL pass. And until next time, have a good one.